Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. I interview incredible people who've dedicated their lives to helping those who've been impacted by trauma. Here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have as my guest today back, Dr. Hillary McBride. Hillary, welcome back.
It's so good to be back. I was looking forward to this all week.
Awesome. So Hillary is a registered psychologist, a researcher, and podcaster with expertise that includes working with trauma and trauma therapies and embodiment at the intersection of spirituality and mental health. Her recent book, Holy Hurt, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Trauma, came out in April 2025. Her podcast, Other People's Problems, is incredible. Normally, therapy sessions are totally confidential, but this podcast opens the doors. Her recent season offers an unprecedented look at psychedelic psychotherapy, breaking new ground in podcast space and demystifying this often misunderstood practice as a powerful tool in trauma recovery. All right, Hillary, before we get going here and dive in, it feels like there's so much to talk about. Remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I grew up in Vancouver, but I currently live in Victoria, BC, which is an island off the west coast of Canada. And so we have ocean almost everywhere we go. There's ocean around us. So I'm loving the island living.
All right. Let's, if we can here, I want to set some context. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got so much going on. You're doing so much. I should say that. Incredible work. But give our listeners a little bit of understanding. How did you get drawn into this field, this space? And you might, if you want, start out more broadly, but I'm really curious about your interest in trauma.
Yeah, interest in trauma more generally. Well, I remember I had a class in my graduate degree. I was doing my master's and I had this professor who I loved. He taught my psychopathology class. Actually, it was not. It was advanced counseling skills. And I remember thinking like, oh, he understands something about the substrate that's underneath, that undergirds most mental health concerns. Like it felt like he just got something about the human experience and who was walking through the door. And he was offering a trauma class that summer. And I remember taking it and thinking, oh, I think that this might be why people go to therapy. I think this might be the thing, right? Like this, I when he was talking about the nervous system and he was talking about dissociation, I was thinking, I don't know if there's a single person on the planet who this doesn't apply to on some level, especially when we expand our definitions of trauma to include neglect, like absence trauma, early in development before we have autobiographical memory. Like, whoa, who doesn't this touch? And it was that lens that really started to shape the way that I was working with people as they were coming into my office. Now, it took me a little while after that point to go, oh, if it's about everybody out there, oh, maybe it's actually about in here too, right? This nervous system, this body. And it was a few years prior to that where I had a really acute car accident. I'd been hit in an intersection while driving and hadn't really processed what that was like for me, except I'd done all of the medical interventions. I'd gone to the physio and the OT and all the therapies, but I hadn't really spent time looking at what it was like for me to live in the aftermath of that and the terror that still lived in my body. And it actually wasn't for a number of years, and actually, unfortunately, a few more very serious car accidents for me to realize, oh, I have to look at this. And it was when I started to peel back the layers of the shock trauma, right, the index event of these car accidents, that I was able to go, okay, this reminds me of something that was here even before the car accidents.
So first of all, that realization that, excuse me, you might have to look inside. That's a big one.
It's a big one, yeah.
It's a big one for all of us. But I think it's it's large for therapists who are like, wait a minute, I've got to look at myself here. So did that impact how you started working with people?
Oh, my own trauma?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it made me more courageous to to actually do all of the things in a very, like with a lot of fidelity, like try all the therapies, try all of the things that I was offering other people, that I'd heard about, that I was reading in the research literature. And I think that's like something that some of our listeners might be familiar with, is that we hit a desperation point at some point where the just thinking about it or the keeping it over there isn't enough. And we have to take these risks. It's like we get our discomfort internally pushes us beyond what the avoidance is allowing us to have access to. And we move into the space of actually like free falling into trying all of the things that unfortunately take us closer to the pain, but ultimately also get us through to the other side, or have the potential to do so. But I think I just want to come back to the point that you made about therapists, because I've been really getting into the work of Karen Morota lately. She's a psychoanalyst, and her theory is that the field of psychotherapy and helpers disproportionately draws and attracts people who have this kind of parentified schema, internal working model, that as a profession, we are people who have been really, really skilled and have had to become skilled at seeing everybody else's stuff at the exclusion of our own. So it may be important for us, if we're in this profession, to ask the question, why is it so easy for us to help other people go to these places that we don't go? And what does that tell us about how we had to cope and survive and manage, and some of the interpersonal dynamics that made us forget about our bodies in the first place? Like when I teach therapists, when I train clinicians, whether it's like undergraduate to the graduate level or postdoctoral, we're a group of people who have a hard time being connected to ourselves and being in our bodies, but are really, really good, have monetized our defense strategies by building entire careers around regulating other people. And at some point, it's really important that we go, wait, why, what has led to that? So that just came to mind when you were saying that.
Yeah, no, that is awesome. I love that. And that topic really drives the work I do, because just quickly, when I first started doing this, I was like, okay, I'm going to have on these people and they're going to tell me about all their books and their interventions they use, and what is the knowledge that I can learn and then share. And slowly one of the questions I would ask was, could you share an early clinical error and what you learned from that? And of course, there were some people who were like, well, I don't make any errors and da-da-da. But most people, 99.9% of the people would, and these are very seasoned clinicians, would say, talk about a kind of a rupture, an inability in themselves to look at themselves, to do exactly what you were talking about, and how that really caused a rupture in the relationship, but then afforded obviously an opportunity for growth and repair and so forth. And that gave me the courage to start looking at my own stuff, my own trauma, my own shame. And it really, like I said, inspired the work I do, because you're right, so many of the therapists are like, wait a minute, you want me, I can fix that other person and help them, but I got to look at me? That's a whole different ballgame. Anyway, that's a whole different podcast. So let's talk about your podcast, Other People's Problems. I love the title. How did this come about? And I just got to say at the onset here, you're like a natural. I mean, not surprisingly, but it's incredible. How did this come about?
Oh, thank you. Well, as I think with many good ideas, they come from encounters with gaps in experience or knowledge. And this actually was not my idea. The podcast comes from my producer, Jody Martinson, who is not just a wizard, but extremely, gifted in this area and working with people. And I think has, through listening to probably thousands of hours of my therapy, may also have like an honorary doctorate at this point. She has been such a gift to work with, but it was her idea to say, wait a second, there is, what actually happens behind the scenes. And when going to therapy, realizing this is not at all like the things that I see portrayed on TV or the things that people talk about. Like there's actually something really different happening here than the trope of psychotherapy that we reference in our media or that we see in the movies. And so the idea came from wanting to demystify what was behind the scenes. And what we found over the past 4 seasons of having this show come out is that in listening to people's therapy with me, right? Because the show is me sharing audio, of course, with this very thorough legal and consent process of recorded sessions with my patients. And then a little bit of voiceover to explain, like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I think is happening, here's what's going on. That over 4 seasons of that being out in the world, that people who have been able to share their work have felt prouder and braver for it, that it's actually compounded their sense of mastery and agency of realizing, like, wow, I can be a part of cultural change, and I can actually alter the fabric of our society that creates the stigma that harmed me. Like, by sharing this, like, people are feeling empowered. We're seeing that people who hear the show are feeling more courageous to go to therapy. We're hearing that people who hear the show are actually feeling less alone in the internal struggles that they've carried so privately inside of themselves and felt like, I can't tell anybody about. So it's done this really interesting, important thing. Oh, I should also say that therapists often use the audio for training, and we'll talk I keep hearing, if I go do a speaking event or something, people will, come talk to me and they'll say, I listened to your show in my class, right? And we were like talking about the choices you made and, what we would have done differently and what like we think was really appropriate. And I love the idea of people learning from my mistakes, learning from my skill, like sharing, so that we can, undo the aloneness of what it's like to be in this room, which is often such a solitary, isolating thing for us as therapists too.
I could imagine that a lot of your guests, that takes some balls to say, okay, record me and put me on a podcast.
Right.
I mean, what is the process that's going on there?
Right, yeah. Well, I will say that for a lot of the work that I do, we're recording it anyway. That's like a big part of the model of ADP, and ADP is one of the main therapies that I use, that we're recording because then we get to come back to seeing what happened in a session. And often people, when they record their session, get to listen back and go, oh, that's what I sound like, or that was that moment, or we can use it for integrating insights. So if recording is kind of normalized, then the thought of having the recording and eventually down the line saying, hey, do you feel open to sharing this for this project? And here's some of the risks and here's some of the benefits. And let's listen to the audio, and then let's listen to it when it's cut, and let's listen to it when it's got my voiceover in it. And then let's listen to it a bunch more times. And do you want to have a friend listen to make sure, do you want to take it to, right? Like the season that we just released took 2.5 years to produce.
Whoa!
So it's like an extremely lengthy process. And the purpose of that is that consent is a process. It's not a singular moment of time. And for people to feel like their yes holds up over a year or year and a half, and many rounds of edits tells us that yes is a more robust yes.
Let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Dr. Hillary McBride. We're talking about her incredible podcast, Other People's Problems. So what did you have to sit with and agree to?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it reminds me of your question earlier to past podcast guests. Like, tell me about early clinical errors. Like, for me, the thing that has been there's been an existential moral inner conflict about, can I ask these people to do this? And how do we ask them in a way where I'm not misusing a power dynamic? So like struggling through the ethical pieces there took a lot of time. And that for me felt important, like protecting my clients' privacy, power, and agency, like their right to choose, like protecting that, like weighing the balance of all of that was tricky. But I think in addition to that, and maybe also feeling protective of them when the audio comes out into the world and figuring out like, okay, how are we going to navigate this and support them through this? But I think that the trickiest thing for me was, what is it like to grow as a clinician and recognize that I work very differently than I did 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 2 years ago, because I'm learning all the time and I'm refining and I'm growing in my skill. But there are these like frozen in time moments of my clinical work that are extremely imperfect, that are out in the world. Like, I think that can be really vulnerable and risky, not just for the patient, but for us as clinicians to go, okay, here it is. Here's what it sounds like. Recognizing like how could we ever judge a relationship, and how could we ever judge like that's what it is, like this dyadic attachment dynamic that is unfolding between two people in this very emergent way, and then to extract that and give it a timestamp and share it with the world, like misses so much nuance and complexity to me and to our working relationship. And so it has felt like often more at the beginning than now, like this internal wrestle, like, okay, am I okay with it being imperfect and it being out there? Am I okay with recognizing that I'm going to grow and change, and I would never work some of the way, or I'd never make that choice again, or even at that time, as we often do as therapists, we make a clinical choice and the session ends and we go, oh, great. Okay. I missed that thing. And to have the errors and the beauty and the power captured and have people, right? There's like something around the ego that I had to negotiate, something around like my impression management of myself.
Do the guests have the choice of either using their real names and identities or not? And there's a big difference there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. And we could like bring it back to, I would say like feminist principles of research. Often in the ethics process of this, I kept going back over and over and over to ethical principles that we get from qualitative research and how we're sharing stories and what we do when we're publishing stories in media, in journals, in books and things like that. And for me, the thing that I kept coming back to was some of the principles that guide feminist research around giving people power, and how do we give people power instead of using them? And how do people figure out what the risks and benefits are of attaching their name and identity to something? But yeah, we gave people the choice, and we talked about what that could cost them and how it could go well for them and what they get out of it, and versus like, some of the challenges that might come up. But what's interesting about that particular phenomena that I just want to bring into this conversation, as you're talking about people have to have some balls to do this, and like it could be really risky. This is the first season where I'm including a session of my own. So season 5, I actually flip sides of the room. I'm on the couch, so to speak. And this whole season of season 5 is exploring psychedelic psychotherapy. And this particular piece of work is profoundly important and vulnerable for me. And so when I was thinking about what am I asking people to do by inviting them to share their stories, or even just supporting them to do that, I really felt what that was like this season by putting myself in their shoes and feeling through all the details of what do I want people to know? What do I not want people to know? And it is me, right? It's my name, it's my voice, it's my story. It's totally recognizable. And people are probably going to hear it driving to work someday, because it's a CBC podcast, which means CBC is our national radio in Canada. It's just on the radio. So someone's going to be like making muffins some Saturday morning, and they're going to turn on the radio, and I'm going to be talking about my trauma and processing through it. And like, wow, what a thing to know is like being broadcast into the radio waves of Canadians and people across the world. So like the courage is terrifying. I mean, that's part of the nature of courage, is you have to be in contact with some fear for it to be courageous or to be brave. But it's been also incredibly empowering to feel like I get to know that process of sharing in a way that I think is part of our collective liberation.
That's really interesting. That's really inspiring too. I would imagine that some therapists out there were like, well, who come from more of a psychodynamic background. Why would you want to? What's the benefit of sharing that information? Why would you want other potential clients to know about that? How do you respond to that?
Well, first I would say I am also psychodynamically trained. And so I would see that like the school of thought to imply that it's a monolith or uniform in our decision-making really misses how much our own individual and attachment history plays into the theoretical frameworks that we choose. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who gravitate towards more dynamic cognitive approaches because they allow us to be invisible in the room and disembodied in the room. So our biases about how we work are also telling about our stories. And it may not be that the biases that we have in our work are the most accurate or most healthy perceptions of what is needed in a therapeutic dynamic or what's needed in our social climate. But I think for me, what I would say is that like it was actually in a psychodynamically oriented training where I heard, I think it was Diana Fosha say, we just need to be a little bit braver than our patients, right? We just need to be a little bit more courageous. So when I think about what is actually the posture and stance of the clinician, it's me being willing to say, I will 100 times out of 100 go there with you too. Or I know that place inside of me. So there's that piece of it. And I think like the feminist psychodynamic, attachment, relational, like when I think about the justice angle of psychotherapy when it's done well, is also us saying like, how do we change culture at large? That there is an incredible story that is pervasive in our social context, which we perpetuate as clinicians often, that suggests if we are in the seat of the helper, if we take on this archetype of the guru, of the helper, of the healer, that we are, that we have ascended in some way, right? That we are like, we are impermeable, that there is nothing that can touch us because of look at how much knowledge we have, look at how much we help people. And I actually think that does harm to all of us, that particular trope. And for me, like there's a thing that I think I'm really trying to do with showing my piece of tape or my work is to say there is no role you have, there is no amount of power that you've been given, there is no story that's been handed to you about who you have to be that does not that cuts you off from the human stuff inside that demands to be accompanied, that demands to be seen, that is there, whether you're in contact with it or not, that is like likely shaping so much of how you are in the world. And so I really wanted to model that and say, like, listen, I'm the person who people come to, right? Even just in this archetype that's created of me with the show and the books and these things, like here's this person who has this information and helps other people. And it's incredibly dehumanizing to us. And I think we dehumanize ourselves. And it's way healthier, as far as I'm concerned, for us as healers to say, yeah, and I'm doing the same thing that I'm asking you to do.
Yeah. I love that. This idea of honoring the imperfection is so exciting to me. And it opens the doors for creativity. You know, I think oftentimes, and I myself definitely ascribe to this feeling that the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, is often seen like the therapist is holding this, like, not everyone, but a lot of therapists are holding this like very delicate, beautiful crystal orb, and at each interaction, you know, you can't push it too hard, and you can't, God forbid, you drop it, but rather, you know, I started to see it as rather this hunk of clay, you know, and you're going to walk, and it's going to dent and indent here. Oh, it slipped, but it becomes beautifully just dented and shaped, and it's more forgiving. It's more imperfect, and that's what relationships are. So what have you learned about yourself and personally and as a therapist from this experience?
I have learned that my patients, we are not as fragile as perhaps we might think we are, right? To your point about the clay and the orb, right? This idea of like, wow, okay, there's actually always available inside of us this drive towards change and healing and creativity and connection. Like there is a lot, even inside the places of the most terror, the most pain, even in the moments of the most fragility. There is something that sustains and supports life that's available to all of us, that is there. And so I think I'm more in contact with my courage and the courage inside of other people through doing this. I feel more passionate about changing language and culture as it relates to our fundamental understandings of mental health and mental health treatment and mental health outcomes. Like for me, it's so easy for me to get into this world where all I do is talk about therapy and emotion and trauma. It's like everything I do all day long, I write and think, and most of my friends are therapists. It's just like this very insulated world. And then I do a project like this and it gets into the world and I realize, holy moly, we have a long way to go. Like we have a long way to go culturally till even our assumptions about what therapy is more accurately reflect the kinds of work people are doing behind closed doors. And then I think, what have I learned? That I feel most alive when I take calculated, safe risks. Like when I do I've heard the parenting, the framework or the idea, like doing dangerous things safely. Like there is something about like pushing us forward that makes me feel like, wow, that like I feel connected to meaning and purpose and aliveness. And I felt that in my patients too, as they're talking about taking these risks. Like, okay, we've thought through it. We flipped it on its head. We thought through it. We flipped it back. We thought through it. And it's like, okay, no, this is a risk I want to take. And wow, what a thing to feel like we're alive in this lifetime. Like that's, yeah. I feel connected to that.
I love that. We have a few minutes left here. I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about your book, Holy Hurt, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Trauma. Why did you write that?
Yeah, because it needed to be written. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I was reading this book the other day. It's called The Body is a Doorway by Sophie Strand. And she was talking about the creative impulse being this, I can't remember the word in its original language, but it translates to like a gremlin, like this thing, this creature inside of you that's like, I have to come out. Like it's almost like the vomit reflex, the expulsion reflex. There's just something, it's like, it has to happen. And that, like the birth of that was probably 7 years ago when I was on the podcast, the Liturgist podcast, talking about spiritual trauma, and the feedback that I got from people was there needs to be so much more about this. And I felt on the heels of that podcast and doing that recording and starting to see it in my patients and like researching more, like, oh, there's so much more that needs to be said. And there's just not enough out there for us to understand, which is what is now, I would almost say, like a kind of ubiquitous trauma that experiences as the foundation of our, like, why does whiteness exist? Why do people of European descent exist on indigenous land? Well, spiritual trauma undergirds pretty much every system that we have in North America, right down to the things that are actively happening at this point in time in North America politically, like the way that we're looking at harmful religious and spiritual theological ideas and practices as they fragment us from ourselves and from each other. Like, this spiritual trauma and religious trauma is not just for the person who experienced a single event of clergy abuse, right? Like, there is something that is baked into the fabric of our culture that I'm trying to get to here. And often when I have an idea for a book, by the time it comes out, it feels like, oh, it's too late. Is it too late? Is it too late? Oh, right. Like, and I think, of course, that often happens for us with a creative process. If you're making something, by the time it gets into the world, after years and years, it's like, okay, I've turned this over so many times. It feels like it's complete for me. But this book, I'm realizing as it comes into the world, is like right on time for this cultural moment. And there is some ache in me and relief in me that we get to have more conversations because of tools like my book, other people's books. Like, there's a lot more that's coming out about religious and spiritual trauma, high control cults, sexual purity movements, like things that have been so, that have shaped people's lives and shaped their development in very, sometimes insidious and overt ways. But like, wow, we get to talk about it. And whenever we make the implicit explicit, when we put names to things like this, as part of how we can heal.
It's interesting to see the work you do, and now with the podcast, kind of coming at knowledge and culture and information and humanity from all these different points. It feels, Hillary, like there's so much to talk about that I would love to talk with you about and love to have you back to talk about other things. But Once again, the podcast is Other People's Problems, and the book is Holy Hurt, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Trauma. What's the best way for people to learn more about what you're doing and get in touch?
Well, have a look at my books. Check those out on my website, Hillary L. McBride. I also have a newsletter. If you head to my website, then I send that out with dates where I'm speaking and doing trainings and doing events. And I've got a couple offerings coming up this summer and this fall related to psychedelic psychotherapy trainings and teaching and workshops and groups and things like that. So have a look at my website for that. Instagram is probably where I hang out the most.